Completely on. All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for real folks, real people, just like you and just like me. So, David Lee Roth sat down with Joe Rogan, and I did a video about this with regards to, um, I think, the most newsworthy thing musically that came out of it is that he has a relationship with Alex Van Halen, and apparently they speak frequently. The rock media chose to focus on Roth and what he said about social issues. I'm always shaking my head because maybe some other group of people who focus on those sorts of things ought to discuss those things. Now, I'm not putting a moratorium on websites to say, hey, this is what you should talk about, this is what you shouldn't talk about. But I've noticed that when it comes to certain causes that these folks support, they'll find a way to talk about it, even though Roth spent maybe a few minutes discussing it. And the things they highlight are the things they agree with. It seems as though everybody is on the same page in the neoliberal world of music and politics and how it just fuses together. Nobody right now, by the way, in music seems to be very anti-war, whereas 50 years ago, the anti-war movement in this country was a real thing, and there were legendary performers who were leading the way and saying some very profound things. But today, we've got David Lee Roth doing comics about how Joe, and I'll just say because that's what he said in his comic, Joe takes down COVID, down goes COVID. Okay. And it was the most ridiculous cartoon, the premise that this has gone away, which most people who think like Roth believe this is never going to go away. And talk to some Californians sometime and ask them how they're doing. Talk to people from Canada. All right. That's the first part of my video, just analyzing that discussion. There was some really good stuff in there. I enjoy listening to Roth speak. It's a little difficult because he's missing, is a tooth in there that Dave should have probably done something to prior to being on Rogan. But anyway, that's just a minor criticism of, watching the two of them speak. I think the glaring thing that Roth hasn't really discussed is the passing of Eddie Van Halen in any kind of real sincere detail. Like, you would think an hour of this podcast would have been devoted to their relationship, to Ed's ability to play guitar like nobody else, to the band dynamic. But again, we hear the same things that we hear often when Roth talks. He did mention Michael Anthony, which I think is good. He kind of said anybody can he didn't say it that way, but he's like, anybody, you can find a bass player anywhere. Meaning what? That Michael's ability to play bass is just sort of perfunctory. It's just okay. But his vocals are what counts. Now, I agree with Roth. His vocals are very important. So give Roth credit for at least mentioning Michael Anthony and Alex Van Halen. That's essentially 3/4 of Van Halen. Of course, he didn't talk about Sammy Hagar. Would have been interesting to hear. Rogan, I don't know if Rogan was not really probing in that way. Rogan basically lets the conversation go where it may, but it's still troubling to me. It really is genuinely troubling that, when Eddie passed, Sammy Hagar looked literally like he lost his best friend, even though he and Ed weren't on great terms up until at least a few months prior to his passing. Same thing with Michael Anthony, who essentially was the black sheep of the family. And we still don't know what it was between Ed and Michael Anthony. Like, what was the big thing that was splitting those two guys apart? But again, I was expecting a eulogy. I was expecting a tribute. I was expecting something that only Dave could probably say because he's eloquent on a lot of things. And I thought, hey, and I scanned through it unless I missed it because I didn't listen to every minute of it. But, you know, much like the Cliff Notes, I just kind of skimmed forward, listened, skimmed forward. Because I'm thinking if he's going to talk about Eddie Van Halen, it's not going to be 3 minutes. We're not going to get the same treatment that he gave to, I don't know, the social issues that everybody seems to be so excited about today, where we have much bigger problems that have to do with liberty and freedom of movement and freedom of speech and freedom of a lot of things that I think some of us have taken for granted and now are maybe rethinking that to some degree that we've just sat idly by. Meanwhile, Roth gives the same 50-year-old talking points about an issue that happened back in the early 70s. And it's just mind-boggling to me, mind-boggling to me. And no rock star that I know is truly anti-war. Maybe Roger Waters is, and I don't know. I'd have to kind of sit down. Maybe he thinks some wars are okay, but unless you're being attacked, my opinion is no. It's none of our business. Let's stay home. Let's secure and protect our own homeland. Can we do that? Can we at least act maybe a little more like Switzerland? You know, armed but neutral? I don't know. These are just some of my thoughts, and you don't have to agree with my political musings here, but the point is, here's an interview. Here's a great opportunity to talk about the greatest guitar player that ever lived, or if he's not your favorite, you know, he's a lot of people's favorite. All right. And here's a guy who would have details that few other people on planet Earth would have, and yet he chose not to talk about it, or Rogan chose not to ask the questions. I don't know. I'm just thinking a wasted opportunity. They talked a lot about Dave's radio career. You know, why people didn't, you know, couldn't stomach his radio career, or the powers that be did not want him unchained. Of course, they don't want anyone unchained. Of course. This is why Rogan has a podcast. This is why people who are off the grid on various platforms like YouTube and other places, I won't name them, but are doing much better than if they tried to do it the corporate route, because corporations focus test. Corporations have guys in ivory towers who make decisions, and some of those decisions omit so much good stuff. And it's just sad. This is why a lot of people have found alternatives to the usual nightly news with David Muir, or whatever the guy's name is. So in any event, that's my video. I'm done. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and you can join me on Patreon for just $1 a month. If you feel the need to give more, feel free to give more. Otherwise, I just appreciate anybody who decides to part with $1 a month. I know things aren't good in a lot of places, and patrons have sent me messages saying, hey, I'd like to continue to give to you, but the price of everything has just gone up enormously. And yeah, inflation. Yeah, nobody's really talking about that, are they? Nope. Just down goes COVID. Yeah, sure. Anything you say. Yeah. We'll just look at your comic and we'll say, yep, wow, this is so insightful and brilliant.